because you did his biography, let me ask you this. I think the last substantial book that came to me was Roadmaps of the 21st Century by Sunil Ambekar, which was a book written about the RSS, right? I find that generally it may be a very transparent organization internally. On the outside, it's very opaque, right? You barely hear a statement from Mr. Mohan Bhagwat. You hear a statement from him in the media 4 or 5 times a year, right? Usually nothing more than a few lines. Um, Unlike the BJP, which uses the RSS for its ideological underpinnings, the RSS doesn't seem to have a media presence where its functionaries come and talk about what they do, right? So for the outside world, I'm not even sure how the RSS literature makes it across to the average person, right? There is far more on Hindu nationalism, Hindutva than there is about the RSS. Now, because you wrote this book, I'm sure you got access to archives, how the organization works internally. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm afraid the answer is somewhat serendipitous. So what happened was I began to ask questions. The first time I came to India properly, I was a backpacker at 22 years old, trying to find my family roots. These were the times where there were no apps to book trains or buses, and so it was like queuing up, and I struggled to navigate India completely. But even at that age, we're talking now 2001, 2002.
Right.
So now the smart viewers can figure out my age. As a 22-year-old, even at that age, just as a tourist backpacking, I remember distinctly seeing grown men in these khaki shorts on parks playing games, right?
Right.
Nothing much else. But as I got into private equity, I came to India on several financial trips. I came here on several conferences. I would ask people, and very quickly, you would bump into the RSS. For example, you'd bump into its labor unions. You'd bump into its student unions. You would bump into some engineering club, but all the engineers are part of the RSS. Or you'd bump into some IT group, but again, all the IT guys are somehow connected to the RSS, right? And so I began to realize that this thing called the RSS is everywhere. And as I mentioned earlier, as I started to explore RSS literature, which I found unpalatable, and I started to explore academics and academic literature, the academy, which I found it was helpful, but it didn't really answer the nub of it. I began to critique this whole thing. And effectively, at a conference or another, I bumped into a very senior pracharak of the RSS who basically kept in touch with me, and then afterwards said to me, look, you seem to be dissatisfied so much, well, why don't you write something? And I laughed it off, of course, being in London, no archival material. Who am I to do this, and why would I, right? I've got a busy private equity career.
If you liked the episode, please leave your key takeaways in the comments. It helps us decide future episodes. And of course, make sure you follow Dostcast on Spotify. Dostcast to the moon.
But he was quite serious, which surprised me. And so he gave me access to a man called Milind Oak, who was the archives keeper for the RSS. And before you knew it, I had to pinch myself because I was in a room twice the size of this room, stacked of boxes, stacked of documents, which were the original letters, notes, documents that Hedgewar himself had written. And so suddenly I found myself in a place where I discovered very few people had access to. And I'm ever so thankful to Milind Oak and some of these senior pracharaks to give me the access and have the confidence to kind of give me that access. And let me just say, right, for the record, not once did anybody senior within the RSS ask about what am I writing, how am I writing it, let us check it. They didn't restrict me from saying, oh, you can't say this, you can't say that. So, credit where credit is due. That was the caveat that I said I would write this with, is A, I need source material. I can't just take people's word for it. And number two is you got to give me freedom. Without that freedom, it's just not worth my time. I'm not going to do it. And credit where credit is due. They just gave me full, complete access and, freedom to go and write. Now, I have to say, I maybe only touched 30 or 40% of what was in that room, right? And the British Library, I thoroughly scoured. The NMML in Delhi, I thoroughly scoured. There were some great microfilms over there. But in terms of the archival material, there's still a lot to go through that somebody can, in the future, go into, I suppose. But that's how it happened. And that's how a concoction of curiosity, serendipity, and of course, this is the smartness of I suppose, pracharaks in the RSS. I mean, they discovered, obviously, that I could write. I am trained in philosophy. I spent 2 years studying comparative religion, Christianity and Islam.
Interesting.
So they obviously knew I could write, and they obviously thought, well, this Brit who doesn't understand much about Indian politics or contemporary Indian society might just be the right man to kind of go and explore this, and maybe that's what they thought, I don't know. But 7 years later, here I am.
If you love this episode, make sure you leave a note at the end so we know what more to make of. And of course, follow those cats on Spotify, those cats to the moon.